Welcome to Soft Hour Library. Tonight's story begins now. Close your eyes and rest.
Chapter 9. M. Giraud finds some clues. In the salon, I found the examining magistrate busily interrogating the old gardener Auguste. Poirot and the commissary, who were both present, greeted me respectively with a smile and a polite bow. I slipped quietly into a seat. M. Hortet was painstaking and meticulous in the extreme, but did not succeed in eliciting anything of importance. The gardening gloves Auguste admitted to be his. He wore them when handling a certain species of primula plant which was poisonous to some people. He could not say when he had worn them last. Certainly he had not missed them. Where were they kept? Sometimes in one place, sometimes in another. The spade was usually to be found in the small tool shed. Was it locked? Of course it was locked. Where was the key kept? Parbleu, it was in the door, of course. There was nothing of value to steal. Who would have expected a party of bandits, of assassins? Such things did not happen in Madame la Vicomtesse's time. M. Hortet signifying that he had finished with him, the old man withdrew, grumbling to the last. Remembering Poirot's unaccountable insistence on the footprints in the flower beds, I scrutinized him narrowly as he gave his evidence. Either he had nothing to do with the crime, or he was a consummate actor. Suddenly, just as he was going out of the door, an idea struck me. "Pardon, M. Hortet," I cried, "but will you permit me to ask him one question?" "But certainly, monsieur." Thus encouraged, I turned to Auguste. "Where do you keep your boots?" "Sac à papier," growled the old man. "On my feet, where else?" "But when you go to bed at night?" "Under my bed." "But who cleans them?" "Nobody. Why should they be cleaned? Is it that I promenade myself on the front like a young man? On Sunday I wear the Sunday boots, bien entendu, but otherwise—" He shrugged his shoulders. I shook my head, discouraged. "Well, well," said the magistrate, "we do not advance very much. Undoubtedly we are held up until we get the return cable from Santiago. Has anyone seen Giraud? In verity that one lacks politeness. I have a very good mind to send for him, and—" "You will not have to send far, M. le Juge." The quiet voice startled us. Giraud was standing outside, looking in through the open window. He leaped lightly into the room and advanced to the table. "Here I am, M. le Juge, at your service. Accept my excuses for not presenting myself sooner." "Not at all, not at all," said the magistrate, rather confused. "Of course I am only a detective," continued the other. "I know nothing of interrogatories. Were I conducting one, I should be inclined to do so without an open window. Anyone standing outside can so easily hear all that passes. But no matter." M. Hortet flushed angrily. There was evidently going to be no love lost between the examining magistrate and the detective in charge of the case. They had fallen foul of each other at the start. Perhaps in any event it would have been much the same. To Giraud, all examining magistrates were fools, and to M. Hortet, who took himself seriously, the casual manner of the Paris detective could not fail to give offense. "Eh bien, M. Giraud," said the magistrate rather sharply. "Without doubt, you have been employing your time to a marvel. You have the names of the assassins for us, have you not? And also the precise spot where they find themselves now." Unmoved by this irony, Giraud replied, "I know at least where they have come from." Comment. Giraud took two small objects from his pocket and laid them down on the table. We crowded round. The objects were very simple ones, the stub of a cigarette and an unlighted match. The detective wheeled round on Poirot. "What do you see there?" he asked. There was something almost brutal in his tone. It made my cheeks flush, but Poirot remained unmoved. He shrugged his shoulders. "A cigarette end and a match. And what does that tell you?" Poirot spread out his hands. "It tells me nothing." Ah, said Gerard in a satisfied voice, you haven't made a study of these things. That's not an ordinary match, not in this country at least. It's common enough in South America. Luckily, it's unlighted. I mightn't have recognized it otherwise. Evidently, one of the men threw away his cigarette end and lit another, spilling one match out of the box as he did so. And the other match? Asked Poirot. Which match? The one he did light his cigarette with. You have found that also? No. Perhaps you didn't search very thoroughly. Not search thoroughly. For a moment it seemed as though the detective were going to break out angrily, but with an effort he controlled himself. I see you love a joke, M. Poirot, but in any case, match or no match, the cigarette end would be sufficient. It is a South American cigarette with licorice pectoral paper. Poirot bowed. The commissary spoke. The cigarette end and match might have belonged to M. Renaud. Remember, it is only 2 years since he returned from South America. No, replied the other confidently. I have already searched among the effects of M. Renaud. The cigarettes he smoked and the matches he used are quite different. You do not think it odd, asked Poirot, that these strangers should come unprovided with a weapon, with gloves, with a spade, and that they should so conveniently find all these things? Gerard smiled in a rather superior manner. Undoubtedly it is strange. Indeed, without the theory that I hold, it would be inexplicable. Aha, said M. Hortet, an accomplice within the house. Or outside it, said Gerard with a peculiar smile. But someone must have admitted them. We cannot allow that, by an unparalleled piece of good fortune, they found the door ajar for them to walk in. Secord M. le Juge. The door was opened for them, but it could just as easily be opened from outside by someone who possessed a key. But who did possess a key? Gerard shrugged his shoulders. As for that, no one who possesses one is going to admit the fact if they can help it, but several people might have had one. M. Jacques Renaud, the son, for instance. It is true that he is on his way to South America, but he might have lost the key or had it stolen from him. Then there is the gardener. He has been here many years. One of the younger servants may have a lover. It is easy to take an impression of a key and have one cut. There are many possibilities. Then there is another person who, I should judge, is exceedingly likely to have such a thing in her keeping. Who is that? Madame d'Aubreuil, said the detective dryly. Said the magistrate, his face falling a little. So you have heard about that, have you? I hear everything, said Gerard imperturbably. There is one thing I could swear you have not heard, said M. Hortet, delighted to be able to show superior knowledge, and without more ado, he retold the story of the mysterious visitor the night before. He also touched on the check made out to Duveen, and finally handed Gerard the letter signed Bella. Gerard listened in silence, studied the letter attentively, and then handed it back. All very interesting, M. le Juge, but my theory remains unaffected. And your theory is? For the moment, I prefer not to say. Remember, I am only just beginning my investigations. Tell me one thing, M. Gerard, said Poirot suddenly. Your theory allows for the door being opened. It does not explain why it was left open. When they departed, would it not have been natural for them to close it behind them? If a Sergeant de Ville had chanced to come up to the house, as is sometimes done to see that all is well, they might have been discovered and overtaken almost at once. Bah, they forgot it. A mistake, I grant you. Then, to my surprise, Poirot uttered almost the same words as he had uttered to Bex the previous evening. I do not agree with you. The door being left open was the result of either design or necessity, and any theory that does not admit that fact is bound to prove vain. We all regarded the little man with a good deal of astonishment. The confession of ignorance drawn from him over the match end had, I thought, been bound to humiliate him, but here he was self-satisfied as ever, laying down the law to the great Giraud without a tremor. The detective twisted his moustache, eyeing my friend in a somewhat bantering fashion. "You don't agree with me, eh? Well, what strikes you particularly about the case? Let's hear your views." "One thing presents itself to me as being significant. Tell me, M. Giraud, does nothing strike you as familiar about this case? Is there nothing it reminds you of?" "Familiar, reminds me of? I can't say offhand. I don't think so, though." "You are wrong," said Poirot quietly. "A crime almost precisely similar has been committed before." "When and where?" "That, unfortunately, I cannot for the moment remember, but I shall do so. I had hoped you might be able to assist me." Giraud snorted incredulously. "There have been many affairs of masked men. I cannot remember the details of them all. These crimes all resemble each other more or less. There is such a thing as the individual touch." Poirot suddenly assumed his lecturing manner and addressed us collectively. "I am speaking to you now of the psychology of crime. M. Giraud knows quite well that each criminal has his particular method, and that the police, when called in to investigate, say a case of burglary, can often make a shrewd guess at the offender, simply by the peculiar method he has employed. Japp would tell you the same, Hastings. Man is an unoriginal animal. Unoriginal within the law in his daily respectable life, equally unoriginal outside the law. If a man commits a crime, any other crime he commits will resemble it closely. The English murderer who disposed of his wives in succession by drowning them in their baths was a case in point. Had he varied his methods, he might have escaped detection to this day. But he obeyed the common dictates of human nature, arguing that what had once succeeded would succeed again, and he paid the penalty of his lack of originality. "And the point of all this," sneered Giraud, "that when you have two crimes precisely similar in design and execution, you find the same brain behind them both. I am looking for that brain, M. Giraud, and I shall find it. Here we have a true clue, a psychological clue. You may know all about cigarettes and match ends, M. Giraud, but I, Hercule Poirot, know the mind of man." And the ridiculous little fellow tapped his forehead with emphasis. Giraud remained singularly unimpressed. "For your guidance," continued Poirot, "I will also advise you of one fact which might fail to be brought to your notice. The wristwatch of Madame Renaud, on the day following the tragedy, had gained 2 hours. It might interest you to examine it." Giraud stared. "Perhaps it was in the habit of gaining. As a matter of fact, I am told it did." "Eh bien, then." "All the same, 2 hours is a good deal," said Poirot softly. "Then there is the matter of the footprints in the flower bed." He nodded his head towards the open window. Giraud took 2 eager strides and looked out. "This bed here?" "Yes, but I see no footprints." "No," said Poirot, straightening a little pile of books on a table. "There are none." For a moment, an almost murderous rage obscured Giraud's face. He took 2 strides towards his tormentor, but at that moment the salon door was opened, and Marchot announced, "M. Stoner, the secretary, has just arrived from England. May he enter?" Chapter 10. Gabriel Stoner. The man who entered the room was a striking figure, very tall. With a well-knit athletic frame and a deeply bronzed face and neck, he dominated the assembly. Even Giraud seemed anemic beside him. When I knew him better, I realized that Gabriel Stoner was quite an unusual personality. English by birth, he had knocked about all over the world. He had shot big game in Africa, traveled in Korea, ranched in California, and traded in the South Sea Islands. He had been secretary to a New York railway magnate, and had spent a year encamped in the desert with a friendly tribe of Arabs. His unerring eye picked out M. Hortet. The examining magistrate in charge of the case. Pleased to meet you, M. le Juge. This is a terrible business. How's Mrs. Renaud? Is she bearing up fairly well? It must have been an awful shock to her. Terrible, terrible, said M. Hortet. Permit me to introduce M. Bex, our commissary of police, M. Giraud of the Sûreté. This gentleman is M. Hercule Poirot. M. Renaud sent for him, but he arrived too late to do anything to avert the tragedy. A friend of M. Poirot's, Captain Hastings. Stoner looked at Poirot with some interest. Sent for you, did he? You did not know, then, that M. Renaud contemplated calling in a detective, interposed M. Bex. No, I didn't, but it doesn't surprise me a bit. Why? Because the old man was rattled. I don't know what it was all about. He didn't confide in me. We weren't on those terms, but rattled he was, and badly. Said M. Hortet, but you have no notion of the cause. That's what I said, sir. You will pardon me, M. Stoner, but we must begin with a few formalities. Your name? Gabriel Stoner. How long ago was it that you became secretary to M. Renaud? About 2 years ago, when he first arrived from South America. I met him through a mutual friend, and he offered me the post. A thundering good boss he was too. Did he talk to you much about his life in South America? Yes, a good bit. Do you know if he was ever in Santiago? Several times, I believe. He never mentioned any special incident that occurred there, anything that might have provoked some vendetta against him. Never. Did he speak of any secret that he had acquired whilst sojourning there? No. Did he ever say anything at all about a secret? Not that I can remember, but for all that, there was a mystery about him. I've never heard him speak of his boyhood, for instance, or of any incident prior to his arrival in South America. He was a French-Canadian by birth, I believe, but I've never heard him speak of his life in Canada. He could shut up like a clam if he liked. So, as far as you know, he had no enemies, and you can give us no clue as to any secret to obtain possession of which he might have been murdered. That's so. M. Stoner, have you ever heard the name of Duveen in connection with M. Renaud? Duveen, he tried the name over thoughtfully. I don't think I have, and yet it seems familiar. Do you know a lady, a friend of M. Renaud, whose Christian name is Bella? Again, Mr. Stoner shook his head. Bella Duveen, is that the full name? It's curious, I'm sure I know it, but for the moment I can't remember in what connection. The magistrate coughed. You understand, M. Stoner, the case is like this. There must be no reservations. You might perhaps, through a feeling of consideration for Madame Renaud, for whom I gather you have a great esteem and affection, you might, enfin, said M. Hortet, getting rather tied up in his sentence, there must absolutely be no reservations. Stoner stared at him, a dawning light of comprehension in his eyes. I don't quite get you, he said gently. Where does Mrs. Renaud come in? I've an immense respect and affection for that lady. She's a very wonderful and unusual type, but I don't quite see how my reservations, or otherwise, could affect her. Not if this Bella Duveen should prove to have been something more than a friend to her husband. Ah, said Stoner, I get you now, but I'll bet my bottom dollar that you're wrong. The old man never so much as looked at a petticoat. He just adored his own wife. They were the most devoted couple I know. M. Hortet shook his head gently. M. Stoner, we hold absolute proof, a love letter written by this Bella to M. Renaud, accusing him of having tired of her. Moreover, we have further proof that at the time of his death, He was carrying on an intrigue with a Frenchwoman, a Madame d'Aubreuil, who rents the adjoining villa. And this is the man who, according to you, never looked at a petticoat. The secretary's eyes narrowed. Hold on, M. le Juge. You're barking up the wrong tree. I knew Paul Renaud. What you've just been saying is utterly impossible. There's some other explanation. The magistrate shrugged his shoulders. What other explanation could there be? What leads you to think it was a love affair? Madame d'Aubreuil was in the habit of visiting him here in the evenings. Also, since M. Renaud came to the Villa Genevieve, Madame d'Aubreuil has paid large sums of money into the bank in notes. In all, the amount totals £4,000 of your English money. I guess that's right, said Stoner quietly. I transmitted him those sums at his request, but it wasn't an intrigue. Eh, mon Dieu, what else could it be? Blackmail, said Stoner sharply, bringing down his hand with a slam on the table. That's what it was. Ah, voilà une idée, cried the magistrate, shaken in spite of himself. Blackmail, repeated Stoner. The old man was being bled, and at a good rate too, 4,000 in a couple of months. Hugh, I told you just now there was a mystery about Renaud. Evidently, this Madame d'Aubreuil knew enough of it to put the screws on. It is possible, the commissary cried excitedly. Decidedly, it is possible. Possible, roared Stoner. It's certain, tell me have. You asked Mrs. Renaud about this love affair stunt of yours. No, monsieur, we did not wish to occasion her any distress if it could reasonably be avoided. Distress? Why, she'd laugh in your face. I tell you, she and Renaud were a couple in 100. Ah, that reminds me of another point, said M. Hortet. Did M. Renaud take you into his confidence at all as to the dispositions of his will? I know all about it, took it to the lawyer for him after he'd drawn it out. I can give you the name of his solicitors if you want to see it. They've got it there, quite simple. Half in trust to his wife for her lifetime, the other half to his son, a few legacies. I rather think he left me 1,000. When was this will drawn up? Oh, about 1.5 years ago. Would it surprise you very much, M. Stoner, to hear that M. Renaud had made another will less than a fortnight ago? Stoner was obviously very much surprised. I'd no idea of it. What's it like? The whole of his vast fortune is left unreservedly to his wife. There is no mention of his son. Mr. Stoner gave vent to a prolonged whistle. I call that rather rough on the lad. His mother adores him, of course, but to the world at large, it looks rather like a want of confidence on his father's part. It will be rather galling to his pride. Still, it all goes to prove what I told you, that Renaud and his wife were on first-rate terms. Quite so, said M. Hortet. It is possible we shall have to revise our ideas on several points. We have, of course, cabled to Santiago and are expecting a reply from there any minute. In all possibility, everything will then be perfectly clear and straightforward. On the other hand, if your suggestion of blackmail is true, Madame d'Aubreuil ought to be able to give us valuable information. Poirot interjected a remark. M. Stoner, the English chauffeur masters, had he been long with M. Renaud? Over 1 year. Have you any idea whether he has ever been in South America? I'm quite sure he hasn't. Before coming to Mr. Renaud, he had been for many years with some people in Gloucestershire whom I know well. In fact, you can answer for him as being above suspicion. Absolutely. Poirot seemed somewhat crestfallen. Meanwhile, the magistrate had summoned Marcia. My compliments to Madame Renaud, and I should be glad to speak to her for a few minutes. Beg her not to disturb herself. I will wait upon her upstairs. Marcia saluted and disappeared. We waited some minutes, and then, to our surprise, the door opened, and Mrs. Renaud, deathly pale in her heavy mourning, entered the room. M. Hortet brought forward a chair, uttering vigorous protestations, and she thanked him with a smile. Stoner was holding one hand of hers in his with an eloquent sympathy. Words evidently failed him. Mrs. Renaud turned to M. Hortet. "You wish to ask me something, M. le Juge?" "With your permission, madame, I understand your husband was a French-Canadian by birth. Can you tell me anything of his youth or upbringing?" She shook her head. "My husband was always very reticent about himself, monsieur. He came from the Northwest, I know, but I fancy that he had an unhappy childhood, for he never cared to speak of that time. Our life was lived entirely in the present and the future." "Was there any mystery in his past life?" Mrs. Renaud smiled a little and shook her head. "Nothing so romantic, I am sure, M. le Juge." M. Hortet also smiled. "True, we must not permit ourselves to get melodramatic. There is one thing more," he hesitated. Stoner broke in impetuously. "They've got an extraordinary idea into their heads, Mrs. Renaud. They actually fancy that Mr. Renaud was carrying on an intrigue with a Madame d'Aubruil, who, it seems, lives next door." The scarlet color flamed into Mrs. Renaud's cheeks. She flung her head up, then bit her lip, her face quivering. Stoner stood looking at her in astonishment, but M. Bex leaned forward and said gently, "We regret to cause you pain, madame, but have you any reason to believe that Madame d'Aubruil was your husband's mistress?" With a sob of anguish, Mrs. Renaud buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders heaved convulsively. At last she lifted her head and said brokenly, "She may have been. Never in all my life have I seen anything to equal the blank amazement on Stoner's face. He was thoroughly taken aback." Chapter 11. Jack Renaud. What the next development of the conversation would have been, I cannot say, for at that moment the door was thrown violently open, and a tall young man strode into the room. Just for a moment I had the uncanny sensation that the dead man had come to life again. Then I realized that this dark head was untouched with grey, and that, in point of fact, it was a mere boy who now burst in among us with so little ceremony. He went straight to Mrs. Renaud with an impetuosity that took no heed of the presence of others. "Mother!" Jack, with a cry, she folded him in her arms. "My dearest, but what brings you here? You were to sail on the Anzora from Cherbourg 2 days ago." Then, suddenly recalling to herself the presence of others, she turned with a certain dignity. "My son, messieurs." "Aha," said M. Hortet, acknowledging the young man's bow. "So you did not sail on the Anzora?" "No, monsieur. As I was about to explain, the Anzora was detained 24 hours through engine trouble. I should have sailed last night instead of the night before, but happening to buy an evening paper, I saw in it an account of the awful tragedy that had befallen us." His voice broke, and the tears came into his eyes. "My poor father, my poor, poor father." Staring at him like one in a dream, Mrs. Renaud repeated, "So you did not sail?" And then, with a gesture of infinite weariness, she murmured as though to herself, "After all, it does not matter now." "Sit down, M. Renaud, I beg of you," said M. Hortet, indicating a chair. "My sympathy for you is profound. It must have been a terrible shock to you to learn the news as you did. However, it is most fortunate that you were prevented from sailing. I am in hopes that you may be able to give us just the information we need to clear up this mystery." "I am at your disposal, M. le Juge. Ask me any questions you please." "To begin with, I understand that this journey was being undertaken at your father's request." "Quite so, M. le Juge. I received a telegram bidding me to proceed without delay to Buenos Aires, and from thence via the Andes to Valparaiso and on to Santiago. Ah, and the object of this journey? I have no idea, le juge. What? Number C, here is the telegram. The magistrate took it and read it aloud. Proceed immediately Cherbourg, embark Anzora, sailing tonight Buenos Aires. Ultimate destination Santiago. Further instructions will await you Buenos Aires. Do not fail. Matter is of utmost importance. Renaud. And there had been no previous correspondence on the matter. Jacques Renaud shook his head. That is the only intimation of any kind. I knew, of course, that my father, having lived so long out there, had necessarily many interests in South America, but he had never mooted any suggestion of sending me out. You have, of course, been a good deal in South America, Renaud. I was there as a child, but I was educated in England and spent most of my holidays in that country, so I really know far less of South America than might be supposed. You see, the war broke out when I was 17. You served in the English Flying Corps, did you not? Yes, le juge. Hortet nodded his head and proceeded with his inquiries along the, by now, well-known lines. In response, Jacques Renaud declared definitely that he knew nothing of any enmity his father might have incurred in the city of Santiago or elsewhere in the South American continent, that he had noticed no change in his father's manner of late, and that he had never heard him refer to a secret. He had regarded the mission to South America as connected with business interests. As Hortet paused for a minute, the quiet voice of Giraud broke in. I should like to put a few questions on my own account, le juge. By all means, Giraud, if you wish, said the magistrate coldly. Giraud edged his chair a little nearer to the table. Were you on good terms with your father, Renaud? Certainly I was, returned the lad haughtily. You assert that positively? Yes. No little disputes, eh? Jack shrugged his shoulders. Everyone may have a difference of opinion now and then. Quite so, quite so. But if anyone were to assert that you had a violent quarrel with your father on the eve of your departure for Paris, that person, without doubt, would be lying. I could not but admire the ingenuity of Giraud. His boast, I know everything, had been no idle one. Jacques Renaud was clearly disconcerted by the question. We did have an argument, he admitted. An argument. In the course of that argument did you use this phrase, when you are dead, I can do as I please? I may have done, muttered the other, I don't know. In response to that, did your father say, but I am not dead yet, to which you responded, I wish you were? The boy made no answer. His hands fiddled nervously with the things on the table in front of him. I must request an answer, please, Renaud, said Giraud sharply. With an angry exclamation, the boy swept a heavy paper knife onto the floor. What does it matter? You might as well know. Yes, I did quarrel with my father. I dare say I said all those things. I was so angry I cannot even remember what I said. I was furious. I could almost have killed him at that moment. There, make the most of that. He leant back in his chair, flushed and defiant. Giraud smiled, then, moving his chair back a little, said, That is all. You would, without doubt, prefer to continue the interrogatory, le juge. Ah, yes, exactly, said Hortet. And what was the subject of your quarrel? I decline to state. Hortet sat up in his chair. Renaud, it is not permitted to trifle with the law, he thundered. What was the subject of the quarrel? Young Renaud remained silent, his boyish face sullen and overcast. But another voice spoke, imperturbable and calm, the voice of Hercule Poirot. "I will inform you, if you like, M. le Juge." "You know." "Certainly I know. The subject of the quarrel was Mademoiselle Marthe d'Aubreuil." Renaud sprang round, startled. The magistrate leaned forward. "Is this so, monsieur?" Jacques Renaud bowed his head. "Yes," he admitted. "I love Mademoiselle d'Aubreuil and I wish to marry her. When I informed my father of the fact, he flew at once into a violent rage. Naturally, I could not stand hearing the girl I loved insulted, and I too lost my temper." M. Hortet looked across at Mrs. Renaud. "You were aware of this attachment, madame?" "I feared it," she replied simply. "Mother," cried the boy, "you too. Marthe is as good as she is beautiful. What can you have against her?" "I have nothing against Mademoiselle d'Aubreuil in any way. But I should prefer you to marry an Englishwoman, or if a Frenchwoman, not one who has a mother of doubtful antecedents." Her rancor against the older woman showed plainly in her voice, and I could well understand that it must have been a bitter blow to her when her only son showed signs of falling in love with the daughter of her rival. Mrs. Renaud continued, addressing the magistrate. "I ought perhaps to have spoken to my husband on the subject, but I hoped that it was only a boy and girl flirtation which would blow over all the quicker if no notice was taken of it. I blame myself now for my silence, but my husband, as I told you, had seemed so anxious and careworn, different altogether from his normal self, that I was chiefly concerned not to give him any additional worry." M. Hortet nodded. "When you informed your father of your intentions towards Mademoiselle d'Aubreuil," he resumed, "he was surprised. He seemed completely taken aback. Then he ordered me peremptorily to dismiss any such idea from my mind. He would never give his consent to such a marriage. Nettled, I demanded what he had against Mademoiselle d'Aubreuil. To that, he could give no satisfactory reply, but spoke in slighting terms of the mystery surrounding the lives of the mother and daughter. I answered that I was marrying Marthe, and not her antecedents, but he shouted me down with a peremptory refusal to discuss the matter in any way. The whole thing must be given up. The injustice and high-handedness of it all maddened me, especially since he himself always seemed to go out of his way to be attentive to the d'Aubreuils and was always suggesting that they should be asked to the house. I lost my head, and we quarreled in earnest. My father reminded me that I was entirely dependent on him, and it must have been in answer to that I made the remark about doing as I pleased after his death." Poirot interrupted with a quick question. "You were aware, then, of the terms of your father's will?" "I knew that he had left half his fortune to me, the other half in trust for my mother to come to me at her death," replied the lad. "Proceed with your story," said the magistrate. After that we shouted at each other in sheer rage, until I suddenly realized that I was in danger of missing my train to Paris. I had to run for the station, still in a white heat of fury. However, once well away, I calmed down. I wrote to Marthe, telling her what had happened, and her reply soothed me still further. She pointed out to me that we had only to be steadfast, and any opposition was bound to give way at last. Our affection for each other must be tried and proved, and when my parents realized that it was no light infatuation on my part, they would doubtless relent towards us. Of course, to her, I had not dwelt on my father's principal objection to the match. I soon saw that I should do my cause no good by violence. My father wrote me several letters to Paris, affectionate in tone, and which did not refer to our disagreement or its cause, and I replied in the same strain. "You can produce those letters, eh?" said Giraud. "I did not keep them." "No matter," said the detective. Renaud looked at him for a moment, but the magistrate was continuing his questions. "To pass to another matter, are you acquainted with the name of Juvine M. Renaud?" Juvine, said Jack. Juvine. He leant forward and slowly picked up the paper knife he had swept from the table. As he lifted his head, his eyes met the watching ones of Gerard. Juvine, no, I can't say I am. Will you read this letter, M. Renaud, and tell me if you have any idea as to who the person was who addressed it to your father? Jack Renaud took the letter and read it through, the color mounting in his face as he did so. Addressed to my father, the emotion and indignation in his tones were evident. Yes, we found it in the pocket of his coat. He hesitated, throwing the merest fraction of a glance towards his mother. The magistrate understood. As yet, no. Can you give us any clue as to the writer? I have no idea whatsoever. M. Hortet sighed. A most mysterious case. Well, I suppose we can now rule out the letter altogether. What do you think, M. Gerard? It does not seem to lead us anywhere. It certainly does not, agreed the detective with emphasis. And yet, sighed the magistrate, it promised at the beginning to be such a beautiful and simple case. He caught Mrs. Renaud's eye and blushed in immediate confusion. Yes, he coughed, turning over the papers on the table. Let me see, where were we? Oh, the weapon. I fear this may give you pain, M. Renaud. I understand it was a present from you to your mother. Very sad, very distressing. Jack Renaud leaned forward. His face, which had flushed during the perusal of the letter, was now deadly white. Do you mean that it was with an aeroplane wire paper cutter that my father was killed? But it's impossible, a little thing like that. Alas, M. Renaud, it is only too true. An ideal little tool, I fear, sharp and easy to handle. Where is it? Can I see it? Is it still in the body? Oh no, it had been removed. You would like to see it? To make sure, it would be as well, perhaps, though Madame has already identified it. Still, M. Bex, might I trouble you? Certainly, M. le Juge. I will fetch it immediately. Would it not be better to take M. Renaud to the shed? Suggested Gerard smoothly. Without doubt, he would wish to see his father's body. The boy made a shivering gesture of negation, and the magistrate, always disposed to cross Gerard whenever possible, replied. But no, not at present. M. Bex will be so kind as to bring it to us here. The commissary left the room. Stoner crossed to Jack and wrung him by the hand. Poirot had risen and was adjusting a pair of candlesticks that struck his trained eye as being a shade askew. The magistrate was reading the mysterious love letter through a last time, clinging desperately to his first theory of jealousy and a stab in the back. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the commissary rushed in. M. le Juge, M. le Juge. But yes, what is it? The dagger, it is gone. Comment gone. Vanished, disappeared. The glass jar that contained it is empty. What? I cried. Impossible. Why, only this morning I saw, the words died on my tongue. But the attention of the entire room was diverted to me. What is that you say? Cried the commissary. This morning. I saw it there this morning, I said slowly. About an hour and a half ago, to be accurate. You went to the shed then. How did you get the key? I asked the Sergeant de Ville for it. And you went there, why? I hesitated, but in the end, I decided that the only thing to do was to make a clean breast of it. M. le Juge, I said, I have committed a grave fault, for which I must crave your indulgence. Eh bien, proceed, monsieur. The fact of the matter is, I said, wishing myself anywhere else than where I was, that I met a young lady, an acquaintance of mine. She displayed a great desire to see everything that was to be seen, and well, in short, I took the key to show her the body. Par exemple, cried the magistrate indignantly, but it is a grave fault you have committed there, Captain Hastings. It is altogether most irregular. You should not have permitted yourself this folly." "I know," I said meekly. "Nothing that you can say could be too severe, M. le Juge. You did not invite this lady to come here." "Certainly not. I met her quite by accident. She is an English lady who happens to be staying in Merlinville, though I was not aware of that until my unexpected meeting with her." "Well, well," said the magistrate, softening. "It was most irregular, but the lady is without doubt young and beautiful, n'est-ce pas? What it is to be young, oh jeunesse, jeunesse," and he sighed sentimentally. But the commissary, less romantic and more practical, took up the tale. "But did not you reclose and lock the door when you departed?" "That's just it," I said slowly. "That's what I blame myself for so terribly. My friend was upset at the sight. She nearly fainted. I got her some brandy and water and afterwards insisted on accompanying her back to town. In the excitement, I forgot to relock the door. I only did so when I got back to the villa." "Then for 20 minutes at least," said the commissary slowly, he stopped. "Exactly," I said. 20 minutes, mused the commissary. "It is deplorable," said M. Hortet, his sternness of manner returning, "without precedent." Suddenly, another voice spoke. "You find it deplorable, M. le Juge?" asked Giraud. "Certainly I do." "Eh bien, I find it admirable," said the other imperturbably. This unexpected ally quite bewildered me. "Admirable, M. Giraud?" asked the magistrate, studying him cautiously out of the corner of his eye. "Precisely." "And why?" "Because we know now that the assassin, or an accomplice of the assassin, has been near the villa only an hour ago. It will be strange if, with that knowledge, we do not shortly lay hands upon him." There was a note of menace in his voice. He continued, "He risked a good deal to gain possession of that dagger. Perhaps he feared that fingerprints might be discovered on it." Poirot turned to Bex. "You said there were none." Giraud shrugged his shoulders. "Perhaps he could not be sure." Poirot looked at him. "You are wrong, M. Giraud. The assassin wore gloves, so he must have been sure." "I do not say it was the assassin himself. It may have been an accomplice who was not aware of that fact." "Ils sont mal renseignés, les accomplices," muttered Poirot, but he said no more. The magistrate's clerk was gathering up the papers on the table. M. Hortet addressed us. "Our work here is finished. Perhaps, M. Renaud, you will listen whilst your evidence is read over to you. I have purposely kept all the proceedings as informal as possible. I have been called original in my methods, but I maintain that there is much to be said for originality. The case is now in the clever hands of the renowned M. Giraud. He will without doubt distinguish himself. Indeed, I wonder that he has not already laid his hands upon the murderers. Madame, again let me assure you of my heartfelt sympathy. Messieurs, I wish you all good day," and accompanied by his clerk and the commissary, he took his departure. Poirot tugged out that large turnip of a watch of his and observed the time. "Let us return to the hotel for lunch, my friend," he said, "and you shall recount to me in full the indiscretions of this morning. No one is observing us. We need make no adieus." We went quietly out of the room. The examining magistrate had just driven off in his car. I was going down the steps when Poirot's voice arrested me. "One little moment, my friend." Dexterously, he whipped out his yard measure and proceeded, quite solemnly, to measure an overcoat hanging in the hall from the collar to the hem. I had not seen it hanging there before, and guessed that it belonged to either Mr. Stonner or Jack Renaud. Then, with a little satisfied grunt, Poirot returned the measure to his pocket and followed me out into the open air. Chapter 12. Poirot elucidates certain points. Why did you measure that overcoat? I asked, with some curiosity, as we walked down the hot white road at a leisurely pace. Parbleu, to see how long it was, replied my friend imperturbably. I was vexed. Poirot's incurable habit of making a mystery out of nothing never failed to irritate me. I relapsed into silence and followed a train of thought of my own. Although I had not noticed them specially at the time, certain words Mrs. Renaud had addressed to her son now recurred to me, fraught with a new significance. "So you did not sail," she had said, and then had added, "After all, it does not matter now." What had she meant by that? The words were enigmatical, significant. Was it possible that she knew more than we supposed? She had denied all knowledge of the mysterious mission with which her husband was to have entrusted his son. But was she really less ignorant than she pretended? Could she enlighten us if she chose, and was her silence part of a carefully thought out and preconceived plan? The more I thought about it, the more I was convinced that I was right. Mrs. Renaud knew more than she chose to tell. In her surprise at seeing her son, she had momentarily betrayed herself. I felt convinced that she knew, if not the assassins, at least the motive for the assassination, but some very powerful considerations must keep her silent. "You think profoundly, my friend," remarked Poirot, breaking in upon my reflections. "What is it that intrigues you so?" I told him, sure of my ground, though feeling expectant that he would ridicule my suspicions. But to my surprise, he nodded thoughtfully. "You are quite right, Hastings. From the beginning, I have been sure that she was keeping something back. At first, I suspected her, if not of inspiring, at least of conniving at the crime." "You suspected her?" I cried. "But certainly, she benefits enormously. In fact, by this new will, she is the only person to benefit. So from the start, she was singled out for attention. You may have noticed that I took an early opportunity of examining her wrists. I wished to see whether there was any possibility that she had gagged and bound herself. Bien, I saw at once that there was no fake. The cords had actually been drawn so tight as to cut into the flesh. That ruled out the possibility of her having committed the crime single-handed, but it was still possible for her to have connived at it or to have been the instigator with an accomplice. Moreover, the story, as she told it, was singularly familiar to me. The masked men that she could not recognize, the mention of the secret, I had heard or read all these things before. Another little detail confirmed my belief that she was not speaking the truth. The wristwatch, Hastings, the wristwatch. Again that wristwatch. Poirot was eyeing me curiously. "You see, mon ami, you comprehend." "No," I replied with some ill humor. "I neither see nor comprehend. You make all these confounded mysteries, and it's useless asking you to explain. You always like keeping everything up your sleeve to the last minute." "Do not enrage yourself, my friend," said Poirot with a smile. "I will explain if you wish, but not a word to Giraud, say entendu. He treats me as an old one of no importance. We shall see. In common fairness, I gave him a hint. If he does not choose to act upon it, that is his own lookout." I assured Poirot that he could rely upon my discretion. "C'est bien, let us then employ our little grey cells. Tell me, my friend, at what time, according to you, did the tragedy take place?" "Why, at 2 o'clock or thereabouts," I said, astonished. "You remember, Mrs. Renaud told us that she heard the clock strike while the men were in the room." "Exactly, and on the strength of that, you, the examining magistrate, Bex, and everyone else, accept the time without further question. But I, Hercule Poirot, say that Madame Renaud lied. The crime took place at least 2 hours earlier." "But the doctors—" "They declared, after examination of the body, that death had taken place between 10 and 7 hours previously. Mon ami, for some reason, it was imperative that the crime should seem to have taken place later than it actually did. You have read of a smashed watch or clock recording the exact hour of a crime, so that the time should not rest on Mrs. Renaud's testimony alone. Someone moved on the hands of that wristwatch to 2 o'clock and then dashed it violently to the ground. But as is often the case, they defeated their own object. The glass was smashed, but the mechanism of the watch was uninjured. It was a most disastrous maneuver on their part, for it at once drew my attention to 2 points. First, that Madame Renaud was lying. Secondly, that there must be some vital reason for the postponement of the time. But what reason could there be? That is the question. There we have the whole mystery. As yet, I cannot explain it. There is only one idea that presents itself to me as having a possible connection. And that is, the last train left Merlinville at 17 minutes past 12. I followed it out slowly, so that, the crime apparently taking place some 2 hours later, anyone leaving by that train would have an unimpeachable alibi. Perfect, Hastings, you have it. I sprang up. But we must inquire at the station. Surely, they cannot have failed to notice 2 foreigners who left by that train. We must go there at once. You think so, Hastings? Of course, let us go there now. Poirot restrained my ardor with a light touch upon the arm. Go by all means if you wish, mon ami, but if you go, I should not ask for particulars of 2 foreigners. I stared, and he said rather impatiently, La, you do not believe all that rigmarole, do you? The masked men and all the rest of cette histoire-là. His words took me so much aback that I hardly knew how to respond. He went on serenely. You heard me say to Giraud, did you not, that all the details of this crime were familiar to me? Eh bien, that presupposes one of 2 things. Either the brain that planned the first crime also planned this one, or else an account read of a cause célèbre unconsciously remained in our assassin's memory and prompted the details. I shall be able to pronounce definitely on that after. He broke off. I was revolving sundry matters in my mind. But Mr. Renaud's letter, it distinctly mentions a secret and Santiago. Undoubtedly there was a secret in M. Renaud's life. There can be no doubt of that. On the other hand, the word Santiago to my mind is a red herring, dragged continually across the track to put us off the scent. It is possible that it was used in the same way on M. Renaud, to keep him from directing his suspicions into a quarter nearer at hand. Oh, be assured, Hastings, the danger that threatened him was not in Santiago, it was near at hand, in France. He spoke so gravely and with such assurance that I could not fail to be convinced, but I essayed one final objection. And the match and cigarette end found near the body, what of them? A light of pure enjoyment lit up Poirot's face. Deliberately planted there for Giraud or one of his tribe to find. He is smart, Giraud, he can do his tricks, so can a good retriever dog. He comes in so pleased with himself. For hours he has crawled on his stomach. See what I have found, he says, and then again to me, what do you see here? Me, I answer with profound and deep truth, nothing. And Giraud, the great Giraud, he laughs, he thinks to himself, oh, that he is imbecile, this old one. But we shall see. But my mind had reverted to the main facts. Then all this story of the masked men is false. What really happened? Poirot shrugged his shoulders. One person could tell us, Madame Renaud, but she will not speak. Threats and entreaties would not move her. A remarkable woman, that Hastings. I recognized as soon as I saw her that I had to deal with a woman of unusual character. At first, as I told you, I was inclined to suspect her of being concerned in the crime. Afterwards, I altered my opinion. What made you do that? Her spontaneous and genuine grief at the sight of her husband's body. I could swear that the agony in that cry of hers was genuine. Yes, I said thoughtfully, one cannot mistake these things. I beg your pardon, my friend, one can always be mistaken. Regard a great actress, Does not her acting of grief carry you away and impress you with its reality? No, however strong my own impression and belief, I needed other evidence before I allowed myself to be satisfied. The great criminal can be a great actor. I base my certainty in this case, not upon my own impression, but upon the undeniable fact that Mrs. Renaud actually fainted. I turned up her eyelids and felt her pulse. There was no deception. The swoon was genuine, therefore I was satisfied that her anguish was real and not assumed. Besides, a small additional point not without interest, it was unnecessary for Mrs. Renaud to exhibit unrestrained grief. She had had one paroxysm on learning of her husband's death, and there would be no need for her to simulate another such a violent one on beholding his body. No, Mrs. Renaud was not her husband's murderess. But why has she lied? She lied about the wrist watch. She lied about the masked men. She lied about a third thing. Tell me, Hastings, what is your explanation of the open door? Well, I said, rather embarrassed, I suppose it was an oversight. They forgot to shut it. Poirot shook his head and sighed. That is the explanation of Giraud. It does not satisfy me. There is a meaning behind that open door which for a moment I cannot fathom. I have an idea, I cried suddenly. Et la bonne heure, let us hear it. Listen, we are agreed that Mrs. Renaud's story is a fabrication. Is it not possible, then, that Mr. Renaud left the house to keep an appointment, possibly with the murderer, leaving the front door open for his return? But he did not return, and the next morning he is found, stabbed in the back. An admirable theory, Hastings, but for two facts which you have characteristically overlooked. In the first place, who gagged and bound Madame Renaud, and why on earth should they return to the house to do so? In the second place, no man on earth would go out to keep an appointment wearing his underclothes and an overcoat. There are circumstances in which a man might wear pajamas and an overcoat, but the other, never. True, I said, rather crestfallen. No, continued Poirot, we must look elsewhere for a solution of the open door mystery. One thing I am fairly sure of, they did not leave through the door, they left by the window. What? Precisely. But there were no footmarks in the flower bed underneath. No, and there ought to have been. Listen, Hastings. The gardener, Auguste, as you heard him say, planted both those beds the preceding afternoon. In the one there are plentiful impressions of his big hobnailed boots, in the other none. You see, someone had passed that way, someone who, to obliterate their footprints, smoothed over the surface of the bed with a rake. Where did they get a rake? Where they got the spade and the gardening gloves, said Poirot impatiently. There is no difficulty about that. What makes you think that they left that way, though? Surely it is more probable that they entered by the window and left by the door. That is possible, of course, yet I have a strong idea that they left by the window. I think you are wrong. Perhaps mon ami. I mused, thinking over the new field of conjecture that Poirot's deductions had opened up to me. I recalled my wonder at his cryptic allusions to the flower bed and the wrist watch. His remarks had seemed so meaningless at the moment, and now, for the first time, I realized how remarkably, from a few slight incidents, he had unraveled much of the mystery that surrounded the case. I paid a belated homage to my friend. As though he read my thoughts, he nodded sagely. Method, you comprehend? Method. Arrange your facts. Arrange your ideas. And if some little fact will not fit in, do not reject it but consider it closely. Though its significance escapes you, be sure that it is significant. In the meantime, I said, considering, although we know a great deal more than we did, we are no nearer to solving the mystery of who killed Mr. Renaud. No, said Poirot cheerfully. In fact, we are a great deal further off. The fact seemed to afford him such peculiar satisfaction that I gazed at him in wonder. He met my eye and smiled. But yes, it is better so. Before, there was at all events a clear theory as to how and by whose hands he met his death. Now that is all gone, we are in darkness. 100 conflicting points confuse and worry us. That is well, that is excellent. Out of confusion comes forth order, but if you find order to start with, if a crime seems simple and above board, A by N Mayfie's vuse, it is, how do you say it, cooked. The great criminal is simple, but very few criminals are great. In trying to cover up their tracks, they invariably betray themselves. Ah, mon ami, I would that some day I could meet a really great criminal, one who commits his crime and then does nothing. Even I, Hercule Poirot, might fail to catch such a one. But I had not followed his words. A light had burst upon me. Poirot, Mrs. Renaud, I see it now. She must be shielding somebody. From the quietness with which Poirot received my remark, I could see that the idea had already occurred to him. Yes, he said thoughtfully, shielding someone or screening someone, one of the two. I saw very little difference between the two words, but I developed my theme with a good deal of earnestness. Poirot maintained a strictly noncommittal attitude, repeating, "It may be, yes, it may be, but as yet I do not know. There is something very deep underneath all this. You will see, something very deep." Then, as we entered our hotel, he enjoined silence on me with a gesture.